My name is Sergeant Avery Cole. I wore the uniform for 12 years. I learned how to keep my hands steady while the world shook around me. But nothing prepared me for the war that started inside my own home. When the Trump Putin meeting hit the news, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself in a long time: hope. If two men who built empires on power could sit down and speak the language of peace, maybe fewer of us would come home in flag-draped silence. Maybe fewer kids would fall asleep to a parent's voice on a phone instead of a kiss on the forehead. While I was overseas counting down sunsets, my husband promised me he was counting too. He said he'd hold the fort, pay the bills, water the plants I named after fallen friends. He sent emojis when I needed sentences and silence when I needed a lifeline. I called it stress. I called it distance. I called it anything but what it was. Homecoming should taste like apple pie and motor oil and the dusty sweetness of a flag folded into a perfect triangle. Mine tasted like copper and lies. The first clue was a scent that didn't belong to me clinging to our couch. The second was his eyes, flinching from mine like they'd been trained to look away. The third was a message he forgot to delete, 4 words that detonated an entire marriage. When is she gone? Out there, I learned to read shadows before they became ambushes. Back here, I learned to read receipts, late-night routes, and the quiet choreography of betrayal. So listen carefully. This isn't a story about politics. It's a story about promises, made on podiums and made in bedrooms. It's about a soldier who believed peace abroad could save families at home, and what she did when hers was already under fire. I am Sergeant Avery Cole. I support the Trump Putin meeting because I know the cost of war. But the battle I'm about to tell you, that one I fought alone. And before it was over, the man who broke our vows learned a lesson I perfected overseas. Revenge is patient, precise, and always on target. Chapter 1: The Uniform and the Vow. Every soldier remembers the day the uniform first slides over their shoulders. For some, it's just fabric, stitched by machines and pressed into shape. But for me, it felt like armor forged out of every promise I'd ever made, to my country, to my family, and to the man waiting at home. That first moment I laced my boots, I told myself I was ready to carry it all. I met Daniel, my husband, just weeks before my second deployment. He wasn't military. He was quiet, bookish, the kind of man who wore glasses that slid down his nose and carried a toolbox like it was part of his hand. He worked construction back then, fixing roofs, patching walls, building futures one nail at a time. And maybe that's what I loved most. While my world was chaos, he seemed steady, grounded. I thought we'd balance each other out. Before I shipped out, we stood in front of a dusty courthouse judge, just the two of us and a friend who doubled as our witness. No gown, no bouquet, no cathedral bells. Just vows. Simple, trembling words that meant everything to me. He said he'd wait for me. He said distance couldn't break what was real. And when I kissed him, I believed him more than I believed the ground under my boots. Deployment is its own kind of marriage. You learn to commit to the rhythm of survival. Every sunrise is a promise that you get to try again. Every sunset is a reminder that someone out there might not see tomorrow. I carried a photo of Daniel in my chest pocket, creased, sweat-stained, but always close. At night, I'd press it against my lips like it could somehow bridge oceans. It was during one of those long nights in the desert when news of the Trump Putin meeting first reached our unit. The chatter buzzed through the tents like electricity. Some laughed it off. Politics was politics, after all, and we'd seen peace talks collapse more times than we could count. But me? I held on to it like oxygen. If two men with armies at their backs could sit across from each other and even talk about peace, then maybe the endless rotations would stop. Maybe we'd spend fewer nights scanning horizons for shadows that moved wrong, fewer mornings writing letters that might become eulogies. Maybe, just maybe, I could be home with Daniel before the gray started streaking my hair. I remember writing him that night. I told him about the summit, about how it made me think of us. I said, if world leaders can put down their weapons long enough to talk, then maybe we can build a future without me always leaving. I pictured him reading those words at our kitchen table, nodding, smiling faintly like he did whenever I dreamed out loud. I pictured him saving the letter, tucking it into a drawer, maybe holding it when he missed me. That's the thing about vows. They're not just made once, they're renewed every day in tiny ways. He promised to keep the home fires burning, and I promised to come back in one piece. Every firefight I survived, every patrol I endured was my way of keeping that vow. I never thought to question if he was keeping his. On my third deployment, I started noticing a change. His letters grew shorter, almost mechanical. Where he once wrote entire pages about the cat knocking over lamps or the neighbor's kids borrowing our tools, now he gave me bullet points, grocery lists, weather updates, quick lines about bills. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe the weight of waiting was heavier than I realized. And I kept telling myself, when the Trump Putin meeting succeeds, when the world calms down, I'll finally be home for good and we'll heal together. But here's the truth about distance. It doesn't just stretch miles, it stretches trust. And trust, once stretched thin enough, starts to snap. I didn't know it then, but while I was clinging to the promise of peace abroad, my husband was breaking every promise at home. I was fighting wars under foreign skies, and he was rewriting the terms of our marriage in secret. If I'd known then what I know now, I might have read his silences differently. I might have seen the war creeping closer, not on the battlefield, but in my own living room. But at the time, I believed in him. I believed in us. And most of all, I believed in peace. Peace between nations and peace waiting for me at home. That belief, that blind, aching faith, would be the very thing that made the betrayal burn hotter when it finally surfaced. Chapter 2. Letters from Home. They say when you're deployed, letters are lifelines. I believe that with my whole heart. In the middle of the desert, under the rattle of helicopters and the smell of sand baked by the sun, a letter is more than words. It's proof that home still exists. At first, Daniel's letters were everything I needed them to be. He had this way of describing the ordinary that made me feel like I was right there with him. He wrote about the neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop howling at the moon, about the leaking faucet he finally fixed, about how he planted marigolds in the front yard because he knew they were my favorite. Every word felt like a rope pulling me back from the edges of war. I used to trace his handwriting with my finger before I went to sleep, pretending the curve of each letter was the shape of his hand in mine. When you're thousands of miles away, you take comfort in small illusions like that. They keep you sane. But over time, the tone began to shift. His letters grew shorter, clipped, like he was in a hurry. The warmth that once filled every page slowly drained out, leaving behind bare-boned updates that felt more like receipts than love notes. I'd open an envelope expecting to feel home wash over me, and instead I'd find lines like, "Paid the bills, weather's been cold, fixed the gutter." No jokes, no little doodles in the margins, no "I miss you" scrawled at the bottom like he used to do without fail. At first, I made excuses for him. Maybe he was tired from work. Maybe the house repairs were piling up. Maybe writing to me hurt too much, like pressing a bruise that never healed. After all, waiting is its own kind of war, isn't it? But the silences grew louder. Emails that once came daily slipped into every other day, then once a week. phone calls grew rushed, his voice distracted, like he was listening for something else in the background. I'd ask about his day, and he'd answer in fragments. I'd talk about mine, and he'd fall quiet, only to change the subject. It was around this time the Trump Putin meeting became more than just a headline to me. I clung to it like a prayer. If peace really was possible, if leaders could sit at a table in Alaska and hammer out words instead of dropping bombs, then maybe my deployments would finally end. Maybe I could come home for good, fix whatever was fraying between us, and stitch our marriage back together before it tore completely. I wrote to him about it, pages filled with hope. I told him how I pictured us sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise without me having to pack a duffel bag again. I poured every ounce of optimism I had left into those letters. But when he replied, it was like throwing confetti into a black hole. He didn't echo my hope, didn't even mention the summit, except once when he wrote, "Politicians talk, that's what they do." It stung, because for me, it wasn't just talk, it was a lifeline. And the man who was supposed to understand me better than anyone dismissed it like it was just another news cycle. I tried not to let it go at me. I folded his letters carefully, tucked them into the small wooden box I carried everywhere, and told myself the warmth would return. I told myself once the stress eased, once he saw me again, in uniform but alive, he'd remember the vows we whispered in that courthouse. But denial only works for so long. There were nights I'd hold his letters under the flickering light of a lantern, reading and rereading them, searching for hidden meaning between the lines. Every clipped sentence felt like a door slowly closing. Every missing "I love you" was a silence that screamed louder than artillery fire. I started to notice patterns. The dates of his letters didn't always line up with the stories he told. He'd say he was home fixing the sink, but I'd find receipts in the envelope for restaurants I didn't recognize. He'd talk about watching late-night TV, but his emails were time-stamped of hours that made no sense for his routine. Little inconsistencies that at first I brushed off. But in hindsight, they were cracks in the armor I refused to see. Looking back now, it feels almost cruel. I was clinging to scraps of paper like they were lifelines, while those same scraps were the breadcrumbs of betrayal. I wanted to believe so badly that our marriage was strong, that the vows we made were ironclad. But paper burns easily, and so do promises. What I didn't know then was that every clipped sentence, every missing word, every silence was a warning shot. A signal that the war I was preparing to fight wasn't in some far-off desert or foreign city. It was already waiting for me back home, in the arms of the man I thought I could trust. And while I was writing him about peace summits and sunrises, he was writing another woman into the margins of our marriage. Chapter 3. Coming Home to a Stranger. There is no feeling in the world like stepping off a military transport plane onto American soil after months in the desert. The air feels thicker, richer, like it's crammed with all the scents you didn't know you missed. Pine, gasoline, fried food from a stand nearby. The roar of engines fades, replaced by the buzz of families, the laughter, the tears. Everyone is scanning the crowd for familiar faces. I was no different. I spotted Daniel almost instantly. He was standing off to the side, hands stuffed in his pockets, shifting from foot to foot. When our eyes met, my heart leapt. I expected him to run toward me, to sweep me up like in those reunion videos that go viral online. But he didn't move. He just stood there, managing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I brushed it off in that moment. Maybe he was nervous, overwhelmed. I'd been gone a long time after all. So I ran to him, threw my arms around his neck, and kissed him like it was the first and last time. But even then, I felt it. His body was stiff, unresponsive, as if my embrace was an obligation rather than a homecoming. The drive back to our house was quiet. I filled the silence with stories about the base, about the younger soldiers who reminded me of rookies fresh out of high school, about the desert sunsets that painted the sky in fire. He nodded, murmured responses, but his eyes never left the road. At one point, I asked him what he thought about the Trump Putin meeting. I told him how much it meant to me, how I believed it could change everything. He just shrugged and said, "It's politics. Don't get your hopes up." That answer felt like a slap. Hope was all I'd had for months, and he dismissed it like a headline he scrolled past on his phone. I let the conversation die after that. The silence felt heavier than the sandbags I used to haul. When we pulled into the driveway, something else felt wrong. The marigolds he once planted for me were gone, replaced by a bare patch of soil. The porch light was burned out. The house itself looked neglected. It was still standing, but it didn't feel like home. Inside, the air smelled different. Not bad, not unclean, just foreign, like a perfume I didn't recognize had seeped into the walls. I set my bags down and tried to shake it off, but unease coiled in my gut. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we once spent hours talking about the future, the same one where we'd laughed until tears spilled over nothing at all. But now, Daniel barely looked at me. He picked at the wood grain with his fingernail, answered my questions with one-word replies, and glanced at the clock more times than I could count. I told myself it was adjustment. Reunion is supposed to be joyous, but the truth is, it can be awkward, even uncomfortable. Two lives that ran parallel for months, suddenly crashing back together. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself he just needed time. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between us didn't close. It widened. He worked late more often than not. When he was home, he spent hours scrolling his phone in silence or retreating to the garage under the pretense of fixing things. When I reached for his hand at night, sometimes he let me take it, other times he rolled away. I tried cooking his favorite meals, surprising him with small gestures, telling him stories that used to make him laugh. Nothing worked. It was as if the man I married had been replaced with a hollow version of himself, someone wearing his face but lacking his soul. The worst part? He stopped asking about my deployments. Once, he couldn't get enough. He wanted to know everything, even the parts I tried to shield him from. But now, when I mentioned the desert or my unit, his eyes glazed over, like he was anywhere but with me. It was during one of those long, lonely evenings that the doubt began to creep in. I started to wonder if maybe he had changed because of me. Maybe the years apart had taken too much. Maybe he had grown tired of waiting for someone who was always leaving. The thought made my chest ache, but I buried it. I told myself I could fix this, that love was enough to patch the holes distance had carved. But the signs kept piling up. Late nights, unfamiliar scents, half-truths that didn't line up. Each clue was like a shadow on the wall. Easy to ignore if you kept the lights off. Impossible to deny once you turned them on. I wanted so badly to believe that the Trump Putin meeting would bring peace to the world. But inside my own house, peace was slipping further and further away. I wasn't living with my husband anymore. I was living with a stranger wearing his skin.
Chapter 4. The Betrayal Uncovered. Suspicion is a slow poison. It creeps in quietly, drip by drip, until every word, every glance, every silence feels tainted. That's how the weeks began to feel with Daniel. I told myself I was imagining things, that reintegration was always hard after deployment. But in my gut, I knew something was wrong. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday night. I had made dinner, his favorite, lasagna, the kind layered with ricotta and fresh basil like his mother used to make. He was supposed to be home by 6. At 7, no call. At 8, no text. Finally, at 9:30, he stumbled through the door smelling faintly of perfume and whiskey. I asked where he'd been. He muttered something about work drinks, but his tie was missing, his shirt rumpled in a way that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or deadlines. He wouldn't meet my eyes when I pressed him further. That night, lying awake beside him, listening to the shallow rhythm of his breathing, I knew he was lying. The lies piled up after that. Business trips that didn't match his company calendar, phone calls he'd take outside, voice hushed, back turned to me. Once, I picked up his jacket from the floor and found a lipstick stain on the inside collar. Too faint to be accidental, too damning to be ignored. Still, I wanted proof, concrete truth, not just shadows and suspicions. Maybe it was the soldier in me, the need for intelligence before making a move. So, I began to watch. I noticed his routines, the way he always left the house at the same time on Thursdays, claiming late meetings. One evening, after he left, I followed. The city at night is full of hiding places, but training teaches you how to move unseen. I kept my distance, heart pounding in my ears, every nerve sharp with adrenaline. He drove not toward the office, but toward the west side of town, an area lined with restaurants, bars, and boutique hotels. My stomach twisted as I trailed him into the parking lot of a hotel whose neon sign flickered half dead. I parked far back, engine off, and watched as he got out of the car. A moment later, a woman emerged from the lobby. She was tall, dark-haired, her dress clinging to her like water. When she saw him, her face lit up. Not the smile of a colleague, but of someone who had been waiting for him. And then, right there, under the glow of the sign, he kissed her. It felt like the air had been sucked from my lungs. My hands clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to storm out, confront them both, unleash the fury that had been building in silence for weeks. But another part of me, the disciplined soldier, the strategist, held back. Rage wins battles, but patience wins wars. I waited until they disappeared into the hotel before driving away, every mile back home stretching like barbed wire across my chest. When I reached the house, I sat in the driveway for nearly an hour, staring at the front door, trying to decide what to do next. Inside, the house smelled of betrayal. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every memory felt infected by that single kiss. I thought about the day I left for deployment, how he had kissed me then, whispering promises of loyalty, of waiting. I thought about the nights I had clung to those promises like a lifeline, letting them carry me through fear, through exhaustion, through the endless desert. And now I saw what those promises were worth, nothing more than smoke. The next morning, he acted as though nothing had happened. He poured coffee, kissed my cheek, asked about my plans for the day. I smiled back, a smile as hollow as his had been at the airport. But behind that smile, I was planning. That night, while he showered, I checked his phone. Military training teaches you how to bypass locks faster than most civilians realize. Within seconds, I was inside his messages. And there it was, weeks of texts to the woman from the hotel. Affectionate words, plans for weekends together, private jokes that mocked the life we had built. In one message, he even wrote, "She'll never know. She trusts me too much." That line cut deeper than any wound I'd taken overseas. Trust was the one thing I had given him without reservation, the one thing I had clung to in the dark, and he had turned it into a weapon against me. I closed the phone, set it exactly where it had been, and walked out onto the porch. The night air was cool, the stars faint against the glow of the city. I thought about the Trump Putin meeting, about the hope I had carried home like a fragile flame. That hope was for peace, for unity, for trust between nations. But standing there, I realized something brutal, Sometimes the greatest betrayals don't happen on the world stage. Sometimes they happen in your own home, at the hands of the person you loved most. I wasn't broken, not yet. I was angry, I was betrayed, but I was still standing. And standing is the first step toward fighting back. Daniel had no idea, but a storm was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left in ruins.
Chapter 5. The Soldier's Resolve. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops of my neighborhood, I was no longer a wife, no longer a woman scorned. I was a soldier again. Every fiber of training drilled into me, discipline, patience, strategy, rose like a tide I had no choice but to ride. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about mission. The Trump Putin meeting had filled the world with chatter about peace, compromise, and keeping wars from spilling into the streets of cities I'd never set foot in. But my own war wasn't in Moscow or Washington. It was in my living room, between the couch I once napped on after long shifts and the man who had turned it into a stranger's bed. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the grain of the wood like it was a map. Each line, each groove, each scar from a dropped mug or careless knife reminded me that battles leave marks, silent reminders of blows once struck. I realized then that my resolve had to be more than fury. It had to be precise, surgical, and lasting. Because revenge, unlike rage, doesn't burn hot. It burns slow. The first step was gathering intel. I watched my husband without him knowing. I studied the rhythm of his lies the way I once studied enemy patrols. He claimed late nights at the office, yet his shirt collars came home wrinkled, his tie half stuffed in his pocket, perfume that was not mine ghosting his skin. I noticed which nights he shaved twice, which mornings he hummed songs under his breath he never hummed for me. Details, all details, tiny tells that soldiers are trained to read as clearly as maps under a red flashlight in the field. The second step was patience. He expected me to explode, to accuse, to rage, so that he could paint me as unstable, as the wounded veteran too damaged to be loved. But I gave him nothing. I smiled when he came home. I asked about his day. I kissed him goodnight with lips that trembled but never broke the mask. He thought I was blind. But blindness was his illusion, not my reality. The third step was purpose. I asked myself again and again, what did I want this revenge to achieve? Did I want him to feel the gut-wrenching pain I felt reading that text message? Did I want him to wake up every day knowing the foundation of his life had crumbled? Yes. But more than that, I wanted freedom, not just from him, but from the power his betrayal had over me. Revenge wasn't just about destroying him, it was about reclaiming myself. Out on deployment, I learned that resolve isn't loud. It doesn't scream or stomp its feet. Resolve is the silent hand tightening straps before a mission. It's the steady breath before pulling the trigger. It's the choice to move forward, no matter what, because standing still means death. So I moved forward, quietly, deliberately. I began documenting everything. Receipts, late-night text notifications, lipstick stains on coffee mugs he left in the car. Each piece of evidence I stored away like ammunition in a crate, knowing the day would come when I would fire them all at once. And while I did it, I pretended to believe him, pretended to be tired from my own long day, pretended to need his reassurances. He was so sure of his deception that he never noticed I was building mine.
At night, while he slept with his back turned to me, I would stare at the ceiling and whisper the same words under my breath. Stay calm, stay focused, stay patient. Those words became my prayer, my anchor, my training mantra, repurposed for the battlefield of marriage. The uniform was gone, but the soldier remained. And here's the truth I realized in those hours. Every battle I'd fought overseas had been about survival, staying alive, keeping my squad alive, completing the mission. This battle was different. This one was about justice. Justice for the vows he spat on. Justice for the trust he shattered. Justice for the woman who traded years of her life so he could live in the safety of a country she defended. No, I wasn't going to settle for a screaming match or a divorce where he walked away clean. No, my revenge would be thorough, final, and poetic. The soldier in me had returned, not to fight on foreign soil, but to reclaim the ground of my own life. And with every piece of evidence I gathered, with every calm smile I forced across my lips, my resolve hardened. Like steel forged in fire, I was shaping myself into something unstoppable. He had no idea the storm was coming, and by the time he realized it, I would already be gone, leaving nothing but ashes of the life he thought he controlled. This was no longer a story about betrayal. This was the story of a soldier's resolve, and once I set my sights on a target, I never missed.
Chapter 6. Operation Payback. Revenge isn't something you rush. It's not a bullet fired in panic. It's a mission planned with patience. I spent years learning to map a battlefield before setting foot on it. This was no different. Home had become my war zone. My target wasn't an enemy combatant. It was the man who once swore before God and my family to never leave my side. Daniel underestimated me. He thought my deployments had drained me, worn me down to some weary woman who would just collapse into tears and walk away. He didn't realize that the Army had taught me the art of covert operations. If he could lie in the shadows of our marriage, then I could hunt in them. The first step was reconnaissance. I tracked patterns, logged his late-night drives, watched how often the other woman's car appeared 2 blocks from our house. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was building a case, bullet point by bullet point. The soldier in me had learned that intel is power, so I collected quietly. Bank statements, hidden messages, even recordings of whispered phone calls. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Confrontation gives the enemy a chance to counterattack. I wanted him cornered, with no exits left. Step 2 was psychological operations, PSYOPs. Back in Afghanistan, we used messages, broadcasts, rumors to unsettle insurgents before the fight ever began. I decided Daniel needed to feel that same creeping dread. I began leaving small reminders around the house. A lipstick mark on a glass that wasn't mine, a receipt for a dinner he never attended, slid under his pillow. Nothing outrageous, just enough to make him question whether he was losing control of his secrets. One evening, I left a note on the bathroom mirror, written in dry erase marker. It simply said, "When is she gone?" The exact phrase I'd seen on his phone. He froze when he saw it, jaw tight, eyes darting toward me like I had a loaded gun pointed at his chest. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and said nothing. The silence was louder than any accusation. Step 3 was economic warfare. In war zones, money fuels movements. Cut it off, and armies crumble.
Daniel was sloppy with finances. Joint accounts, careless swipes of credit cards for hotel rooms he thought I'd never see. I rerouted savings into my personal account, secured the deed of the house in my name, and changed access passwords on every asset that mattered. When the time came, I wanted him broke, both emotionally and financially. But revenge isn't just about destruction, it's about precision. I wanted him to feel every ounce of what I had felt, the loneliness, the betrayal, the humiliation. So I orchestrated a final act. Daniel had been planning a dinner party for his promotion at work, a fancy evening meant to impress colleagues, his boss, and of course, his mistress, who had somehow snagged an invitation. I volunteered to help organize it. He thought it was a sign I'd softened, that I was back to being the doting wife. In reality, it was my stage. The battlefield was set, the audience invited, the timing perfect. I printed every screenshot, every receipt, every photograph, and slipped them into neatly sealed envelopes. Each guest's place setting had one waiting, hidden beneath their menus. I sat at the head of the table, watching him smile like the world was his, watching her laugh a little too loudly, dressed in red like she was the star of the show. When dessert was served, I raised my glass. "To Daniel," I said, "the man who always finds a way to surprise me." And then I nodded to the guests. "Please, open your envelopes." The sound of tearing paper was deafening. Forks froze, eyes widened. His boss dropped his fork with a clatter. The mistress turned ghost pale, her lips parting but no words spilling out. And Daniel went silent, his face collapsing like a building rigged with explosives. That was my ambush. No bullets, no blood, just truth, deployed with the precision of a sniper shot. And the damage was total. His reputation shattered, his career prospects gone, his relationship publicly exposed. And I walked away without raising my voice, without breaking a sweat. Revenge is not rage. Revenge is strategy. And that night, Operation Payback was a complete success. I had turned his lies into his executioner. And he never saw it coming. As I closed the door behind me, I realized something powerful. War might take lives, but betrayal takes souls. And Daniel had just lost his.
Chapter 7. The Revenge Complete. The aftermath of war is never quiet. It lingers like smoke in the lungs, heavy and suffocating. But the aftermath of betrayal, when you've turned the tables on the betrayer, feels different. It feels like the stillness after a storm, when everything broken lies scattered in the open, and you're the only one left standing on solid ground. The dinner party had detonated like a well-placed mine. Daniel's colleagues whispered behind napkins, his boss excused himself early, and his mistress fled without even collecting her handbag. When the last guest had left, Daniel sat there at the table, surrounded by the evidence of his own undoing, staring into nothing. It was the first time I'd ever seen him truly powerless. I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. There was no satisfaction in rubbing salt into a wound that was already infected. I simply stood over him and said, in the calmest tone I could muster, "This is what you built. I just showed it to the world." He didn't answer, not a word. But his silence wasn't strength. It was the silence of a man who had been stripped of every shield, every excuse. I left him there, in the ruins of his empire of lies. The days that followed unfolded with a brutal efficiency. His boss called to say his promotion was suspended pending internal review. His colleagues distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with scandal. The mistress tried to salvage dignity, but quickly discovered that gossip spreads faster than fire. Her name was whispered in the same breath as his, both marked with shame. Meanwhile, I moved forward. I filed the divorce papers I had already prepared. With my groundwork on the accounts and assets, there was little left for him to contest. The house, the savings, the car, all secured. I wasn't just walking away. I was walking away whole, unbroken, and free. Some people asked if I felt guilty, if revenge had hardened me. But guilt belongs to those who choose betrayal. Daniel had taken vows and smashed them like glass under his boots. I had simply gathered the shards and showed him his reflection. There's no cruelty in that, only justice. Justice, though, is not about erasing pain. The nights were still hard. I still woke sometimes expecting his arm across my waist, only to remember that it had been empty long before I left. Betrayal leaves scars that no mission can erase. But revenge had given me something betrayal had stolen: control. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of his downfall, and that shifted everything. Weeks later, I stood outside the courthouse, divorce finalized, papers in hand. Daniel walked past me without a word, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He was a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. And in that moment, I realized the war was truly over. I hadn't just won, I had survived. And survival, true survival, is victory in its purest form. But revenge isn't only for the past, it reshapes the future. I found myself planning again, but not operations, not ambushes. Plans for me. Trips I'd never taken, studies I'd postponed, a business idea I had shelved while playing the role of supportive wife. The energy I once poured into him, I now poured into myself. And it felt like building a fortress from the inside out. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and violet, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. I thought back to Afghanistan, to nights when the gunfire never stopped and survival felt impossible. I remembered promising myself, if I can get through this, I can get through anything. And I realized I had kept that promise. I had fought another kind of war, one without uniforms or rifles, but just as brutal. And I had come out the other side stronger. So when people ask me if revenge was worth it, I don't answer with words. I answer with my life now, calm, unbroken, mine. Daniel is just a ghost of a chapter I've closed. The betrayal will always be part of my story, yes, but the ending belongs to me. And that is the truest revenge of all, living not as the victim of someone else's lies, but as the author of your own freedom. The mission was complete. The soldier in me could finally rest. Revenge is never about going back. It's about breaking free from the chains of betrayal and reclaiming your voice. I didn't burn down his world to stay in the ashes. I did it so I could finally walk into the light of my own future. Daniel's name will fade into whispers, nothing more than a cautionary tale. But mine will echo with resilience, strength, and survival. To anyone listening who's been betrayed, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not broken. Your story isn't over until you choose the ending. And when you take that pen back into your hand, you'll find that the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's freedom. The mission is done. The war is over. And I am finally free. Revenge is never about going back. It's about breaking free from the chains of betrayal and reclaiming your voice. I didn't burn down his world to stay in the ashes. I did it so I could finally walk into the light of my own future. Daniel's name will fade into whispers, nothing more than a cautionary tale. But mine will echo with resilience, strength, and survival. To anyone listening who's been betrayed, remember this. You are not powerless. You are not broken.
Your story isn't over until you choose the ending. And when you take that pen back into your hand, you'll find that the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's freedom. The mission is done, the war is over, and I am finally free.
Thanks for watching this revenge story on Revenge with Emmy. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and payback, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. Click on one of the videos right here on your screen to dive into another powerful story of betrayal, karma, and sweet revenge. This is Emmy, signing off, where revenge is always served cold.